Now guys, I am not necessarily the cleverest person in the world, but sometimes I know where I'm looking at an interesting thing in the markets. I'm not going to say a good thing, I'm not going to say a bad thing, I'm going to say a very interesting thing. The stock's name is Nndm, under the Nasdaq as Nndm, and we can see that Nndm saw highs in the past 6 months back in February, and we have discussed this on the channel before. It hit highs in the $16 range, and we can see ever since it's basically halved in price, down by about 47% in the past month or so, and obviously losing about $7.9 in share price. So a real big loss there for Nndm. But right now you could be asking, is the share a good buy? Well, of course I am not a financial advisor. This video contains only my opinion. It should be taken as nothing more than that, just somebody on the internet with an opinion. And of course I do recommend that you hear other people's opinions. Obviously watch other YouTube channels, read all the news articles that you possibly can, look on the fundamentals of Nndm, and obviously do your own due diligence. So now I've mentioned that, we are going to start off by looking at Nndm over the past week or so, and then obviously scale out to what we have been seeing over the past few months. So again, looking at Nndm now over the past 5 days, big sell-off, down by about 16.19%. Big decrease that is. Again, we hit lows down here on the 25th, so that was of course yesterday on the Thursday, and ever since we have been up by about 2+%. So again, look at those dips up until now, so far up by around 8.97%, so things not doing too bad. Again, looking on the 1-day charts today, we can see a further sell-off continue, starting off 9:30 on a price of around $8.91. We hit lows in the day down here, losing about 6% of value, and this was a low point hitting about $8.28. Since then we have started to climb out ever so slightly. We're up by about 5% from that time period, up about 45 cents it would appear, and again after hours moving up just ever so slightly, and that has begun in the past few minutes, because after hours has only just begun. But yeah, that is what we are looking at so far today for the Friday. Another day in the red. It was trying to pick itself up towards the end of session, but of course it just wasn't enough to carry on and sustain into the green. Again, if we're looking at the whole day, down by only about 1.34%, which isn't that bad in comparison to what we have previously seen, especially over the past month. And a trend that you could be saying over the past 5 days is that basically in the past 2 or 3 days, this sell-off does appear to be losing momentum, and you could be asking yourself, is this stock about to go back up? Well, let's have a look out to the 1-month chart. On the 1-month chart, we can see that the share price has been pretty dead, and it has actually been falling to the downside by a further 15% almost, down by about 14.72% at the moment. The past 6 months, as I have previously mentioned, saw Nndm basically go from a penny stock valued at $1.58 at the start of the 6-month period, all the way up to highs much higher than what I expected, up by about 954%, and we can see that that was up at the $16 range plus. So again, things really moved up for the stock in the past 6 months. Now, after all this hype, you could be asking yourself, is this one bound to continue to carry on growing? And of course, that did not appear to be the case. If we look at Nndm, it obviously stopped off in the past few weeks, and it has been falling consistently. I think there are a few good reasons for that. I think the first good reason for that is obviously the fact that a lot of the market has been down in the past 2 or 3 weeks. The market has been really hard to predict over the past 2 or 3 weeks. It's very hard to say where things are going at the moment. And you know what? Nndm has kind of followed the trend of a lot of stocks selling off. Now, another fine thing to say as well is obviously just reflecting on that share price. If you'd have bought this one at the lows of about $1.50, or at least somewhere in that range, and held up until the highs in the $16 range, you can imagine, guys, you'd have made a lot of money. Just imagine if you'd have held 1,000 shares in this company at that time period. It's bound to be the case that people are going to sell off when the stock rockets over 1,000%, or at least almost 1,000% in such a short period of time. And again, I don't think that's too bad either. I think people are bound to take profits here and there. If we look at the past week for a lot of these stock market indices, the Russell 2000 in the past month, or at least in the past 5 days, is down. We can see this index is pulling itself back up towards the end of week, but again, just not strong enough to end in the green. The S&P 500 in the past week, seeing quite a similar pattern. However, this one is ever so slightly finishing into the green, up by 0.76%. So again, it is in the green, but it almost didn't make it by a very small amount. And looking over to the Dow Jones, Dow Jones is actually up now in the past 5 days. It's up by about 0.51%. So again, not up by much, but it is still up. Now, I think a lot of the reason why the stock is also down is because of earnings throughout 2020. This is something which we have spoken about previously, and right now Google is only showing us a quarter 3, quarter 2 and quarter 1, but we're going to focus on the quarter 3 just to kind of hammer in the message of what we have been seeing. So looking at Google, we can see that Google is basically telling us that the EPS surprise was about minus 462% for quarter 3. That is a rather large decrease. If we look at the revenue expected for quarter 3, we are also seeing a massive decrease of about 63%. So things not looking great from the expectation, and I think it was bound to be the case that this stock was to fall again around these earnings. Now, if we're looking over to the quarter 2 of 2020, we can see quite a similar story. The EPS was minus 200%. The revenue was actually much better than expected. And bear in mind, quarter 2 of 2020 was mid-pandemic when this thing really did start to pick off. And the reason why I mentioned the pandemic is because that is what the company has mentioned when they are talking about their massive decrease in revenue. So this article is coming from the investorplace.com, and it is mentioning Nndm and how revenue has been moving over the past year. So if we read this one together, we can see in 2020, Nndm recorded a total revenue stream, or at least a total revenue of $3.4 million. In 2019, the company recorded $7 million. So it's clearly had a backslide of about 52% in the last year. That's a rather large decrease, guys. That's obvious to say. And again, the company is actually attributing a lot of this due to issues from the pandemic, causing the company to be more cautious with capital expenditures. I think that is fine to an extent. I mean, 52% loss. It's quite steep, don't get me wrong, it's very, very steep, but a lot of companies in the past 12 months, some of them are having an amazing time. Companies like Amazon seeing more sales than ever, but obviously other companies, you know what, it's not been their year throughout 2020. And there are a lot of companies which I do want to give a break for this. I think Nndm is questionable. I think they were bound to see a bit of a sell-off anyway, or at least a decrease in revenue. But subsequently, you know, a 52% decrease, it's hard to say whether all of that can be attested to the pandemic. But there we go, that is what they are saying. Again, ironically, according to this article, the company decided to invest more in increasing sales and marketing activities in 2020. Now, I think what's happening here is that Investor Place are trying to say this is not necessarily a good thing. Again, I think it's hard to say. I think increasing sales and marketing expenditure isn't bad, right? Of course, we obviously want to get more sales. I think when it comes to marketing and that kind of area, we do kind of need to spend a bit more to obviously potentially attract new customers. So I'm not even too concerned about that. I think sometimes a company does need to run at a loss to potentially make a bigger gain in the future. Again, including hiring more personnel. That's what they have done in 2020. So perhaps good things for that. I just don't assume that they would have taken on more people if they couldn't have done it. So that could be a good thing. Anyway, unfortunately, it sold only 4 Dragonfly systems in 2020. So again, that is pretty abysmal, I hate to say it, especially compared to the 27 in the previous year. So realistically, things weren't great in 2020 for Nndm. And again, this article is basically saying that chasing big potential moves in Nndm could get you burnt. I think this is absolutely true. I think we shouldn't be chasing the big moves, but in my eyes, guys, I think in the next 12 months, who knows, we could be seeing a lot of growth on Nndm. Again, people who are talking about massive growth figures up to about $30, I think these have kind of been wiped off the table for now at least. I think I'm going to go with a bit more of a conservative estimate for the next 12 months. I'd like to see this one hit between $12 and about $20 in the next 12 months. I don't think it's impossible that this one could be back to the $16 range by the end of the next 12 months, and I think that is absolutely fine. Let's face it, it's only my opinion and it's not guaranteed to be the case, it's just what I personally think. But if that was the case, and if the stock price was to basically double in the next 12 months, you know what, that might not be a bad opportunity. That's just what I personally think though. So yeah, Nndm has been moving down in the past month or so. I think that's okay. Revenue for 2020 was abysmal. I hate to say it, it's true, it was abysmal revenue figures. And going forwards, I think we could be building on this into 2021, pulling ourselves back and seeing a bit better revenue. And who knows, this could kickstart more growth for the company this year. So I still do think that the fundamentals are decent enough. I think obviously revenue being down has probably, dissuaded some people from investing in this company. That's fine. I think it's also caused a lot of people to sell their shares. That is also fine. I'm not too sure whether this one is at the bottom of its curve right now. I think we could see it go a little bit lower, so I definitely would stay cautious to this one. But I think if you're looking to hold for the next 12 months, and if we can get this one at a slightly better price, who knows, Nndm could be a decent stock. But as the article says, obviously don't look to have massive moves because it's not guaranteed. Again, we just don't know where this one is going, so don't get burnt on it, don't put too much into it obviously, and don't be expecting huge gains as I have mentioned just a moment ago. So that's just my personal thoughts, guys. Please tell me what you think down in the comments. I will see you again very, very soon for another update on Nndm. So thank you for joining me for this one. See you then.